Thank you, Stephen. It is great to see everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Patrick, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
You're a busy man. That was a mouthful, 2 titles, 2 jobs.
That is a lot. I was joking with somebody the other day, if I take on another title, I'll be giving Secretary Rubio a run for his money. So, doing a lot these days, but as we'll talk about, it's a very interesting intersection of 2 seemingly very different disciplines, but actually have quite a bit of overlap.
Yeah, let's start there. I think having one foot in the White House, 1 foot in the Pentagon gives you a really interesting policy perspective, sort of 1 foot on either side of the Potomac. I think probably most people here are familiar with your job at the Council of Advisors, where you work with David Sachs and with Bo Hines crafting digital asset policy. But I think people might be less familiar, certainly maybe in our particular crowd, with the Office of Strategic Capital. Could you walk us through briefly what that does and how do your 2 jobs complement each other?
Sure. So over on the DoD side, I was one of the beachhead team members. Prior to that, was down in West Palm Beach as a member of the official transition team, and so that might explain, the proliferation of different hats. But over on the DoD side, initially served as performing the duties of the Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering, which has a number of different offices underneath it, and so that's kind of the next gen, weapons development, capabilities development. Most folks know DARPA. That's one of the offices underneath that. One office under that started a couple years ago is the Office of Strategic Capital, and the idea being, defense industrial base. We need to get at this problem that we have of the hollowing out of our defense industrial base in a different way, and then also, as a second part of that, how can we be more proactive in this geostrategic competition? When I first joined on January 20th, the Office of Strategic Capital, or OSC, had $984 million of capital to lend, which only at the DoD would that be, a small amount of money. With the continuing resolution, the NDAA for FY25, we expanded to $5 billion where we currently sit. And if reconciliation passes, then we could potentially grow to $200 billion of capital to lend. It is non-dilutive capital, so it's debt capital. There is the potential, depending on if Congress gives us the authority, to expand into equity authority, but a broad mandate to invest in 33 covered technology areas. So it could, span everything from software to hardware. You could be autonomous mobile robots and spacecraft, to cybersecurity and quantum, computing and cyber. So broad mandate, but very exciting.
So $200 billion is a lot of money, even in DoD terms.
Yes.
So how do you plan to deploy that capital? And maybe, as this is the Bitcoin Policy Summit, might some of that money find its way into either Bitcoin or digital asset-related investments?
Yeah, so I don't want to get ahead of our strategy team and commit us to anything, but as I mentioned, it's a broad mandate. There was an initial notice of funding availability that went out in the fall of last year for the then $984 million of capital that we could deploy. We got $9 billion worth of requests. So we were about 8x, 9x oversubscribed for that. So obviously a lot of demand, for folks looking to, scale up and take on, build some of these projects. We will soon be, kind of opening another, RFI for folks to come forward and, solicit, funding for different projects and more of a project finance model. We've been called out in a number of the EOs, specifically on critical minerals, on shipbuilding, strategic maritime infrastructure, and then also some of the drone memos as well. So those are going to be top priorities. But to answer your question specifically, what could be relevant for this space? I think we would be more, if we're deploying capital on the kind of like enabling infrastructure piece of it, so potentially more on the energy side, compute power. We want, compute and energy to be, domestic, secure, and abundant. And so, where we can play to try and, get folks lower cost of energy, secure cyber and compute power, we might be there. So there could be some potential ramifications for this ecosystem.
Well, you have some of the top leaders in the Bitcoin industry listening today, so if people have their pitch decks ready.
We're open for business. We'd love to talk with everyone, yeah.
Thank you for that. And then sort of back to our theme, national security. I think the intersection of your positions kind of puts you in an interesting position and in the middle of some of the most important policy discussions today. Global realignment, strategic competition, particularly with China. And sort of thinking about strategic competition, the Department of Defense looks at competitive advantage, resilience, how to gain battlefield advantage across the board through technology, industrial capacity, supply chains, the whole spectrum. So in your mind, if you take for granted that these global changes are coming and that we will see continued competition, particularly with China, what kind of potential opportunities or advantages does Bitcoin as a unit or as an industry potentially provide the United States?
So I think it's three things. Number one, Bitcoin and the digital assets ecosystem is an engine for economic growth, and a strong economy enables everything else. Without that, we don't play on the world stage in the same way. So, we want to be the crypto capital of the world. The president has said that numerous times. He means it, and that includes both the innovation on the blockchain, but also mining. We want to make sure that we're being a prominent player in domestic mining. Second, I would say. It's really a tool of modern statecraft. We have benefited from the post-World War environment where we've had dollar dominance around the world, and really a economic model that has been shaped by and is really underpinned by the U.S. dollar. So as we move into the future of digital assets, if we're not actively shaping and influencing what that new construct looks like, we're going to be at a disadvantage. You saw that a little bit with the 5G rollout, with China taking the lead and Huawei. We're in this area of geostrategic competition. And so given that this is the future and given the importance of the next generation of the financial system, we have to be involved in that. And then third, I would say, it's a way to, I think, promote, economic development and stability the world over. The billions of people who are unbanked, or, live in oppressive regimes, or even, maybe not even oppressive, just wildly irresponsible regimes, that have runaway inflation. Yeah, exactly. Right. Mm-hmm. So we see that as, kind of a two-way street where it's going to open new markets, reduce counterparty risk, obviously, and also, with stablecoin legislation, it's going to allow a lot of capital, around the world to potentially flow into our private capital markets. And one of the key underpinnings of, why did we stand up the Office of Strategic Capital is one of our greatest assets and advantages in this era of geostrategic competition is our capital markets. They're the envy of the world, trillions of dollars of capital there. How do we harness that? Not in the, CCP model of it, but how do we attract and scale private capital to achieve, what we believe are, important national security objectives. So I think, those three are all playing into the decision-making that's happening not only at the White House with respect to digital assets, but also to an extent at the Pentagon.
And if we judge, I think we all agree that Bitcoin speaks to core American values, self-sovereignty, freedom to transact. I think that the point you make about it providing sort of a supercharged advantage, certainly in global financial competition, I think rings true.
Yeah. There's endless opportunity. There's obviously the pieces of legislation that we're trying to push forward with the Genius Act, clarity, those are top of mind for everybody, working on digital assets in the White House. There will be the forthcoming report on the interagency activities. We've already taken some steps with the SPR. How do we follow that up with the accumulation plan? So there's no shortage of opportunities and things to do. So after we leave here, I'll get right back to it.
And so you have your DoD hat, but again, you also have a policy hat. So what kind of challenges do you foresee? And I'm not talking about political challenges. I'm talking about sort of fundamental governing challenges of integrating Bitcoin into not even just our national security strategy, but also into our general economy.
Yeah, so I mentioned some of the top priorities. Those are difficult. Getting a piece of legislation passed that could be the most, seemingly innocuous bill out there. It's going to require, horse trading and compromise. So we're experiencing that right now, and crafting the strategy to try and get those pieces of legislation home. Obviously, the report is just us, so that simplifies the picture a little bit. And then beyond that, I would say when it comes to whether it's legislation or regulation. there are so many different actors in this space and brilliant people who have, strong opinions and different views. Trying to synthesize those in a coherent fashion, and also understanding that, not everyone's going to get everything that they want is a challenge. So we're actively working to try and craft the best products, that we possibly can, the best policy actions, legislative actions within the realm of the possible. So that's part of our challenge. I would just say, to folks in the industry, I think some of the congressmen had just mentioned it before. When you work in government, in particular the White House, you might expect it to be the opposite. It's thin. There, you don't have, a huge bench of, folks standing at the ready. So we do rely on, industry actors to partner with them to come forward, be a resource for us. I would just say, as best you can, everyone's, selling their own book, but, if you can be a trusted partner and an objective resource, for us, we listen as, much as we possibly can. We rely on the policy research, the documents that you produce to, again, hopefully arrive at the best possible outcome that we can for this industry, because the president on down, we're all committed to it. We want to see it thrive. We want this to be the crypto capital of the world, and it's a Herculean effort to get some of these things through, but trust me, we are working around the clock to get it done.
And you've been a consumer of our analytic products from BPI, so we appreciate that.
That's right. We appreciate that. Yeah, top of the list, BPI right here.
And I do think also, if we saw the 68 senators voted for a Genius Act, I do think there is hope for. I think there's a growing bipartisan consensus that this industry in general, and we're focused on Bitcoin here, but in digital assets in general, I think there's an emerging consensus that this is the direction that on a policy and legal level we want to follow.
Yeah, and I would say, as we did with the strategic Bitcoin reserve and the digital asset stockpile, we recognize, the difference in the space, and we recognize, Bitcoin's, pioneering position. So I think digital assets, the ecosystem overall, when it succeeds, Bitcoin will succeed, and vice versa. So we're mindful of, whether it's mining, or it's the actual innovation on the blockchain. Bitcoin definitely has primacy for us, and we're focused on that. But it's an overall effort to do everything that we can to allow this industry to thrive.
And kind of moving back to your Department of Defense hat and your $200 billion. So what are you looking for from industry? How are you looking for industry to approach your office with ideas to bring innovation to the department? And also in that regard, what might the Bitcoin industry, some of the industry leaders sitting here today, what might they think about to bring to you for consideration for investment?
Yeah, so Office of Strategic Capital, it's in DoD for a reason. It's not a mistake. We have the national security mandate. I think in a conversation with Deputy Secretary Steve Feinberg, he called it, it's a sovereign wealth fund with a NatSec mandate, which is probably a good way to think about it. For the time being, as I mentioned, we're non-dilutive, debt capital. Not everyone's looking for debt capital. So that's kind of, a first, filtering that happens. But, in short order, we might have that equity authority, which would expand, the number of people we could potentially work with. But I would say, we're open for business. We want to talk with companies that are, operating in, building in the national security interest. And that takes on a number of different, forms and industries that might on their face, not seem like a DoD priority. But President Trump, has said repeatedly, and he's really a, pioneer in getting us to think this way. Economic security is national security. And so, to the extent that you come forward, you've got, a project, you've got a company, you're looking to scale up, and there is a national security component to it, through the economic security lens or not, or both, we want to talk to you. So please, we're not hard to find. I think it's osc.mil is our website, reach out, and we'd love to have a conversation.
And as you said, you have a broad mandate, and I think certainly since the change of the administration, I think we even on the Bitcoin industry side, we've seen an increasing interest in figuring out how this technology can be applied, not just to support the network, but also support our economic and our national security goals.
There's no shortage of things that we could be doing. Part of the challenge, in government is you come in and you've got domestic objectives, there's, foreign policy objectives, there's so much that you can do. And, the failure a lot of times is to try and do 100 things and do none of them well. So, we're trying to prioritize and triage and, to your question about what do you do with the capital? Well, there's a ranking, and there's things that we're going to move on right away, and there's other things that hopefully we'll get to in time. But the point is, as in the context of what we're discussing with the digital asset ecosystem, Bitcoin, you got to start somewhere, and you got to build that framework and the foundation, and then allow it to mature and grow. Which we're at the nascent stage right now of trying to really set the framework to allow this industry to then explode with growth, which we believe that it will.
Okay, industry, you heard it here. Patrick, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate it.